The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, taped to the door of the studio apartment Claire Donovan shared with her 12-year-old daughter Maya in North Hollywood. 3 days to vacate. The landlord had been patient for 6 months, but patience had limits, and Claire's unemployment benefits had run out in February. It was now late August, and the California sun beat down on cracked asphalt while inside. Claire stared at the paper and tried to calculate how many nights they could sleep in her 2011 Honda Civic before someone called Child Protective Services. Maya found her mother sitting on the floor, back against the refrigerator that had stopped working 2 weeks ago, the eviction notice crumpled in her fist. The girl set down her backpack, the one with the broken zipper held together by safety pins, and slid down the wall to sit beside Claire without speaking. They developed a language of silence over the past year, a way of being together in crisis that didn't require words that might break the fragile composure holding them both together. "How bad?" Maya finally asked, her voice steady despite being 12 and scared and too familiar with conversations that started this way. 3 days. Claire's throat felt raw, though she hadn't been crying. She learned not to cry where Maya could see. "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. Stop apologizing." Maya's hand found Claire's, fingers interlacing with the automatic comfort of a child who'd spent too many nights reassuring her mother that they'd survive this, too. "We've figured it out before. We'll figure it out again." The optimism would have been heartbreaking coming from any 12-year-old, but from Maya, who'd watched her mother work 3 jobs before the pandemic eliminated all 3, who'd learned to stretch a box of pasta across 4 dinners, who'd stopped asking for new clothes or school supplies, or anything that cost money. It felt like an indictment. Claire had failed at the one thing that mattered, keeping her daughter safe and housed and fed. Everything else was secondary to that fundamental responsibility, and she was failing. Her phone buzzed against the linoleum floor, an unknown number with a 310 area code. Claire ignored it. Debt collectors had her number, and she'd stopped answering months ago because hearing her own inadequacy cataloged in professional tones made it harder to get up the next morning and try again. But the phone buzzed again immediately, then a third time, persistent enough that Maya reached over and picked it up. "Maybe it's a job," Maya said, hope and practicality warring in her expression. "You should answer it." Claire took the phone, pressed the green button, and heard a woman's voice, older and professionally warm in a way that suggested expensive suits and offices with views. "Is this Claire Donovan?" "Speaking." Claire's voice came out flat, defensive, already braced for bad news. "My name is Patricia Westwood. I'm calling from Westwood & Associates, estate attorneys in Beverly Hills. We've been trying to reach you regarding an inheritance matter." The words didn't make sense initially, each one clear, but the sentence as a whole nonsensical. Inheritance implied family, and Claire's family had cut ties when she'd gotten pregnant at 19 by a musician who'd disappeared before Maya was born. Her mother had died 3 years ago without reconciling. Her father, if he was even alive, hadn't spoken to her in over a decade. There was no one left to leave her anything except regret and old grudges. "I think you have the wrong person," Claire said, already moving to hang up. Claire Elizabeth Donovan, born April 15, 1991, in Burbank, California, daughter of Linda Donovan, née Linda Harper. The use of her mother's maiden name stopped Claire's finger over the disconnect button. "That's me. Ms. Donovan, I represent the estate of your mother's aunt, Evelyn Harper. She passed away 6 months ago at the age of 93. You are named as her sole heir." Claire tried to place the name Evelyn Harper and came up with nothing, a blank space where family memory should have been. "I don't know anyone named Evelyn Harper. That's not uncommon in these situations." Patricia's voice remained professionally patient, the tone of someone accustomed to delivering surprising news. "Evelyn was your maternal grandmother's younger sister. She never married, had no children of her own, and apparently followed your life from a distance. Her will is very specific. All assets are to be transferred to Claire Elizabeth Donovan upon completion of probate, which finalized last week." Maya was watching her mother with wide eyes, clearly catching enough of the conversation to understand something significant was happening. Claire's hand tightened on the phone, Years of disappointment making her suspicious of anything that sounded too good to be true. What kind of assets are we talking about? Patricia paused, and Claire heard papers rustling. The primary asset is a property in Los Angeles, specifically a 15-acre estate in Brentwood that Evelyn purchased in 1962. There are significant back taxes owed, which is why the estate took so long to settle. But those have been paid from a separate fund Evelyn maintained for that purpose. The property itself is free and clear. 15 acres in Brentwood. Claire's mind stumbled over the absurdity. Brentwood, where houses sold for tens of millions, where celebrities lived behind gates and hedges, where people like Claire only went to clean houses or deliver food. There had to be a mistake, some cosmic error that would be corrected once she showed up, and they realized she wasn't the right Claire Donovan, that the real heir was someone more deserving, someone who hadn't spent the last year failing at the basic task of keeping a roof over her child's head. Ms. Donovan, are you still there? I'm here. Claire's voice sounded distant to her own ears. What I need to do? Come to our office tomorrow to sign the transfer documents. I'll email you the address and appointment time. Oh, and Ms. Donovan, you should know that the property has been vacant for several years. Evelyn was an assisted living toward the end, and the estate has been in probate, so the house will need significant work. Don't expect it to be move-in ready. After the call ended, Claire sat in stunned silence while Maya waited, patient and curious, and trying not to hope too obviously. Finally, Claire turned to her daughter, the eviction notice still crumpled in one hand and her phone in the other, and spoke words that felt like they might evaporate if she examined them too closely. We just inherited a house in Brentwood. Maya's first reaction was laughter, the slightly hysterical kind that came from too much stress and too little sleep and the sheer absurdity of timing. They had 3 days before eviction, and the universe had apparently decided to drop a house on them. The coincidence felt less like luck and more like a cosmic joke, the punchline arriving just in time to keep the tragedy from being complete. Claire called the landlord that afternoon and explained she'd be out before the eviction deadline, trying to keep triumph out of her voice because Margaret Shin had actually been kind about the late rent, had given Claire more chances than most landlords would have. Margaret listened to Claire's careful explanation about an inheritance and a house in Brentwood, and her silence suggested skepticism, but also hope that this particular tenant's story might actually be true rather than the usual desperate fabrication. I hope it works out for you, Claire, Margaret said finally, her voice carrying the weariness of someone who'd heard too many sob stories and believed too few of them. You and Maya deserve some good luck. They spent the evening packing their lives into boxes and garbage bags, the accumulation of 12 years of Maya's childhood and Claire's struggling motherhood fitting into the back of the Honda with room to spare. Clothes that had been washed so many times the fabric had gone thin. Books from the library's free shelf. Maya's drawings and school papers, carefully preserved even when everything else got sacrificed. Photographs of better times, before the pandemic, before the job losses, before survival became the only goal that mattered. Maya held up a picture of herself at 6, gap-toothed and smiling, sitting on Claire's lap at Griffith Park with the observatory visible in the background. They'd had a picnic that day, sandwiches and fruit and cheap cookies, and Maya had chased pigeons while Claire had watched and felt something close to contentment. The memory felt impossibly distant now, separated by years of grinding poverty that had worn down optimism and replaced it with a constant calculation of resources versus needs. Do you think we'll be happy there? Maya asked, still holding the photograph. At the new house. Claire wanted to say yes immediately, wanted to promise her daughter that their luck had finally turned, that this inheritance was the beginning of better times. But she learned not to make promises she couldn't guarantee, had watched too many certainties dissolve into disappointment to trust anything that hadn't been verified personally. I think we'll have a place to live that's ours, that can't be taken away. That's more than we've had in a long time. But you don't know what it's like yet. The house. No, Claire admitted. Patricia said it needs significant work, that it's been vacant for years. It might be terrible, Maya. It might be falling apart and full of problems we can't afford to fix. We need to be prepared for that possibility. Maya carefully placed the photograph in a box marked "Important Things" in her careful 12-year-old handwriting. But even if it's falling apart, it's ours, right? Nobody can evict us from our own house. The simplicity of that statement hit Claire hard. After a year of insecurity, of never knowing how long they could stay anywhere, of packing and unpacking and moving between temporary solutions, the idea of permanence, even imperfect permanence, felt revolutionary. A falling-apart house they owned was still more secure than a perfect apartment they were being evicted from. They slept on the floor that night, the mattress already in the Honda, along with everything else. Claire lay awake listening to Maya's breathing even out into sleep and tried to imagine what tomorrow would bring. An estate in Brentwood. 15 acres. A house that had been vacant for years. An aunt she'd never known had apparently followed her life from a distance and decided Claire deserved an inheritance despite having never met her. The questions multiplied in the darkness. Why had Evelyn never reached out while alive? What had she seen in Claire's life that made her worthy of this gift? And most pressing, what would they find when they finally saw the property that was apparently now theirs? Patricia Westwood's office occupied the 23rd floor of a glass tower in Beverly Hills with views that stretched from downtown to the ocean. The waiting room had leather furniture and abstract art, and a coffee machine that probably cost more than Claire's Honda. The receptionist offered water with lemon and a smile that was professionally warm but didn't quite reach her eyes when she took in Claire's thrift store clothes and Maya's backpack with its safety pin zipper. They sat on a leather sofa that was more comfortable than any bed Claire had slept in for the past year, and tried not to look as out of place as they felt. Maya studied the art on the walls with the focus she brought to everything, trying to understand what made something worth displaying in an office this expensive. Claire watched people come and go, all of them dressed in clothes that signaled money and confidence and belonging in spaces like this. Patricia Westwood emerged after exactly 3 minutes, having the kind of ageless elegance that money and good skincare created. 60 or 70, perfectly maintained, with silver hair and a sleek bob and a navy suit that probably cost more than Claire's entire wardrobe. Her smile was warmer than the receptionist's, genuine in a way that put Claire slightly at ease. "Ms. Donovan, thank you for coming in. And you must be Maya." She offered her hand to the 12-year-old with the same respect she'd given Claire. "Please come back to my office." The office had even better views, floor-to-ceiling windows showing Los Angeles spread out below, the city where Claire had been born and raised and had never managed to escape. Patricia gestured them to chairs across from her massive desk and opened a file folder that apparently contained Claire's entire future. "Before we begin the paperwork, I thought you might want to know more about Evelyn and why she left you this property." Patricia pulled out a photograph, black and white, showing a young woman in 1940s clothes standing in front of what looked like a mansion. "This is Evelyn at 25. She worked in Hollywood during the Golden Age, started as a secretary at MGM, and worked her way up to executive assistant to several major producers." Claire studied the photograph, trying to see any family resemblance and finding none. The woman looked confident and beautiful and nothing like Claire's own family, which had been working class and struggling for as far back as anyone remembered. "She never married?" Claire asked. "No. She was engaged once in the late 1950s, but he died in a car accident. After that, she seemed to pour all her energy into her career and into collecting things. Memorabilia, primarily. Hollywood history." Patricia smiled slightly. She was quite the pack rat, according to the estate inventory. The house is apparently full of items she accumulated over 60 years. Maya leaned forward, interested despite her usual reserve around strangers. "What kind of items?" "Costumes, props, photographs, documents." Evelyn had access to studio archives and apparently rescued items that would have been discarded or destroyed. She was particularly interested in Judy Garland. Evelyn worked briefly as Garland's personal assistant in 1963, and they remained friends until Garland's death in 1969. The name Judy Garland registered even through Claire's exhaustion and stress. Everyone knew The Wizard of Oz, knew Over the Rainbow, knew at least the outline of Garland's tragic life. But the connection between a studio assistant and one of Hollywood's biggest stars seemed too grand to touch Claire's current reality. The property itself has an interesting history. Patricia pulled out another document, this one a deed from 1962. Evelyn purchased it from Judy Garland's estate after financial troubles forced Garland to sell. It was one of several properties Garland cycled through during her later years. She lived there for less than 2 years, but apparently she left behind significant personal items when she moved out. Suddenly, in 1964, Evelyn bought the property specifically to preserve those items. Claire's stomach tightened with something that might have been excitement or might have been dread. What kind of personal items? I don't know specifically. The estate inventory was conducted from the exterior only because the house has been sealed for several years. Evelyn's instructions were very clear. Nothing was to be disturbed until her heir took possession. You'll be the first person inside since Evelyn entered assisted living in 2019. The paperwork took an hour, Claire's signature appearing on document after document until her hand cramped. Transfer of deed, property tax acknowledgement, utility transfer forms. Each signature making the impossible slightly more real, slightly more binding. Maya sat quietly throughout, occasionally glancing at her mother with an expression that mixed hope and wariness in equal measure. Finally, Patricia slid a key across the desk, old brass worn smooth by decades of use. The property is yours, Ms. Donovan. I've arranged for the utilities to be turned on this afternoon, though I should warn you that the electrical system is likely outdated and may need immediate attention. The property has been maintained minimally, just enough to prevent total deterioration, but you should expect significant issues. Claire closed her fingers around the key, the metal warm from Patricia's hand. Can you tell me where it is exactly? The address? Patricia wrote it on a business card and passed it over. Claire read it twice before the location fully registered. Stone Canyon Road in Brentwood. She'd driven past that area once, years ago, when the Honda had been new and she'd had money for gas to waste on exploring. Estates hidden behind walls and gates, properties that sold for amounts that seemed fictional to people in Claire's economic bracket. Ms. Donovan, Patricia's voice was gentle. I need to prepare you for something. Your family, your mother's family specifically, they're aware of this inheritance. Evelyn's will was public record, and several relatives have already contacted our office claiming that Evelyn was mentally incompetent when she wrote it, that you manipulated her somehow, that the property should be divided among all of Linda's descendants. Claire's brief moment of hope crystallized into something harder. Of course there would be family members appearing now, after years of silence, after her mother's funeral where Claire had stood alone because no one else had bothered to come. The Harper family had disowned Linda for getting pregnant young and marrying badly, and they'd extended that disownment to Claire without ever meeting her. Now, suddenly, they were concerned about family legacy. Can they contest it? Claire's voice came out flat, already preparing for the loss of something she'd barely begun to believe she might actually keep. They can try, but Evelyn's will is ironclad. She updated it 6 months before her death and had 2 psychiatrists evaluate her mental competency specifically to prevent challenges. She knew what would happen and took steps to protect you. But I'm warning you because they may approach you directly. They may try to intimidate you or convince you to share the inheritance voluntarily. My advice is to refer all contact to this office and to document any harassment. Maya's hand found Claire's, squeezing hard enough to hurt. They'd been here before, standing at the edge of something good while people try to take it away. The eviction notices, the job losses, the constant feeling of being one disaster away from complete collapse. This inheritance was supposed to be different, supposed to be the lifeline that finally pulled them up instead of just slowing the descent. But already, complications were appearing, family members emerging from decades of silence to claim what they'd never earned. Thank you for the warning, Claire said, standing with more confidence than she felt. We should go see the property. One more thing. Patricia pulled a manila envelope from her desk drawer. Evelyn left you a letter. She asked that you read it before entering the house. The envelope was heavy, expensive paper stock with Claire's name written in elegant cursive. Claire slid it into her purse, suddenly not wanting to read it here, in this expensive office with its views and leather furniture. Whatever Evelyn had written, whatever explanation or justification or hope she tried to convey, Claire wanted to read it somewhere private, somewhere she could fall apart if the words proved too much. They left the office and walked back to the Honda in silence, the key heavy in Claire's pocket and the letter heavier in her purse. The address on Patricia's business card led them out of Beverly Hills, north through Brentwood's winding streets where houses hid behind hedges and walls, where property values existed in a reality completely disconnected from Claire's lived experience. Stone Canyon Road climbed into the hills, each turn revealing larger estates and more dramatic views. Maya pressed her face to the window, taking in the manicured lawns and gated driveways and the occasional glimpse of mansion behind fortified privacy. Claire's hands tightened on the steering wheel, her Honda suddenly feeling more decrepit among the Range Rovers and Teslas that passed them with casual ease. The address Patricia had written led them to a driveway marked by stone pillars, the gate hanging open and rusted, clearly unused for years. A weathered sign read, "Private Property," in faded letters. Claire turned in, the Honda suspension complaining as the driveway deteriorated from cracked asphalt to gravel to hard-packed dirt. Trees closed in on both sides, overgrown and wild, filtering the late afternoon sun into shifting shadows. The driveway curved and climbed for what felt like a mile, though it was probably less, before finally opening into a circular drive in front of the house that made Claire's breath catch. The estate sprawled before them, Spanish colonial revival architecture from the 1920s, white stucco walls stained and cracking, red tile roof, missing pieces, windows dark behind closed shutters. 2 stories tall with a 3rd-story tower on one wing, wrought iron balconies, arched doorways, and the bones of what had once been spectacular gardens now gone completely wild. Bougainvillea covered entire sections of wall, morning glory vines strangled the courtyard fountain, and weeds pushed through cracks in the beautiful tile work that surrounded the entrance. It was both magnificent and heartbreaking, a mansion that had clearly cost millions to build now sliding into picturesque decay. The kind of property that appeared in architectural magazines as a cautionary tale or a restoration opportunity, depending on your perspective and resources. Maya climbed out of the car first, moving toward the house with the fearless curiosity of childhood. Claire followed more slowly, taking in details that suggested years of neglect. Paint peeling in long strips, gutters hanging loose, sections of stucco that had fallen away entirely to reveal brick underneath. The property was massive, the main house easily 6,000 square feet, with additional structures visible beyond, a separate guest house, what might have been servants' quarters, a garage or workshop partially hidden by overgrown vegetation. "Mom," Maya's voice carried across the courtyard, echoing slightly. "This is ours? This whole place?" According to Patricia, yes. Claire joined her daughter in front of the massive wooden door, arched and 12 feet tall, the kind of entrance designed to impress. 15 acres, she said. All of this. It's like a castle, Maya whispered. Then more practically, a really broken castle that needs a lot of work. Claire pulled out Evelyn's letter, suddenly unable to wait any longer. She needed to understand what this gift meant, what obligations came with it, what Evelyn had expected when she'd left her entire estate to a niece she'd never met. The envelope opened easily, the letter inside written in the same elegant cursive as her name on the front. "Dear Claire, we've never met, and for that I owe you an apology. I followed your life from a distance, receiving updates from a private investigator I hired after your mother cut ties with the family. I watched you grow up, make mistakes, recover from them, become a mother yourself, struggle in ways that should not have been necessary. I did nothing to help while I was alive, and I regret that cowardice. I am leaving you this property because you deserve better than what life has given you so far. This house holds history, both mine and Hollywood's. Judy Garland lived here briefly in the early 1960s, and when she left behind items she never retrieved. I purchased the property specifically to preserve those items, to protect them from being scattered or destroyed or exploited by people who saw only their market value. In the east wing of the house, behind a master bedroom, is Judy's private dressing room. I sealed it in 1964 and have never opened it again. Whatever remains there is yours now, to do with as you see fit. Judy was my friend, and I failed her in many ways when she was alive. Perhaps preserving her things for someone who might truly appreciate them is my way of making amends. Your family, the Harpers, will come for this inheritance. They will claim you are unworthy, that you manipulated me, that the property should be divided among all descendants. They are wrong on all counts. This is yours because I chose to give it to you, because you remind me of Judy in some ways, strong despite circumstances that would break weaker people, determined to protect your daughter despite a world that makes that protection unnecessarily difficult. The property has substantial back taxes paid and utilities arranged for. There is a trust account that will provide basic living expenses for 1 year while you figure out what to do with the estate. Beyond that, you're on your own. I believe you're capable of more than anyone, including yourself, has given you credit for. Be brave, Claire. You've survived worse than an abandoned mansion. With hope for your future, Evelyn Harper. Claire read the letter twice, her vision blurring on the second pass. Maya leaned against her side, reading over her shoulder, both of them processing Evelyn's words in silence. A sealed dressing room. Judy Garland's personal items, left behind and preserved for 60 years, waiting for someone like Claire to inherit them. The implications were too large to fully grasp, the possibilities too overwhelming to calculate. What do you think is in there? Maya's voice was hushed, almost reverent. In Judy Garland's dressing room? I don't know, baby. Claire folded the letter carefully and returned it to the envelope. But I guess we're about to find out. The key turned smoothly in the lock, the mechanism well-maintained despite the exterior's decay. The front door swung inward with a creak that echoed through what sounded like vast interior space. Claire reached for a light switch and was surprised when it worked, dim bulbs illuminating an entry hall that took her breath away. 20-foot ceilings. A curved staircase with wrought iron railings ascending to the second floor. Tile work in blues and yellows and whites, creating geometric patterns beneath decades of dust. Arched doorways leading to rooms she couldn't yet see. And everywhere, stuff. Boxes stacked against walls. Furniture covered in sheets. Filing cabinets. Shelves holding what appeared to be thousands of items. Each one presumably part of Evelyn's 60 years of collecting. Maya stepped inside cautiously, her footsteps echoing on tile. It smells like old paper and dust. It smells like history, Claire corrected, though Maya wasn't wrong. The air was thick with the scent of closed spaces and accumulated time, not unpleasant exactly, but heavy, weighted with decades. They moved through the first floor together, Claire flipping light switches as they went. Most worked, revealing rooms that seemed frozen in time. A living room with furniture from the 1950s, everything covered but still suggesting the elegant entertaining space it had once been. A dining room with a table that could seat 20, place settings still arranged, as if waiting for guests who never arrived. A kitchen that was pure 1960s, avocado green appliances and Formica countertops, surprisingly clean beneath the dust, as if Evelyn or someone had maintained basic hygiene even while letting everything else decay. The library made Maya gasp. Floor-to-ceiling shelves on 3 walls, all of them packed with books. But not just books, scripts, still in their MGM and Warner Brothers binders. Photographs in frames and boxes and loose piles. Movie posters carefully stored in flat files. Documents in manila folders labeled with names Claire vaguely recognized from Hollywood history. Mom, there's a picture here of Judy Garland. Maya held up a framed photograph, black and white, showing a woman in her 40s with that familiar face from The Wizard of Oz, older now and visibly tired, but still beautiful. She was laughing at something off-camera, cigarette in one hand, the other hand gesturing as if in the middle of telling a story. Claire took the photograph, studying Judy Garland's face and trying to connect this image with a sealed dressing room waiting somewhere upstairs. This woman had lived here, had walked these halls, had left behind personal items that Evelyn had decided to preserve. The weight of that history pressed against Claire's chest, making it hard to breathe. The second floor held 6 bedrooms, each one in various states of preservation. Some clearly used by Evelyn, with furniture and personal items visible beneath dust covers. Others looked untouched for decades, original furnishings from the 1920s still in place. The master suite occupied the entire east wing, with windows overlooking what had once been spectacular gardens and now looked like a jungle slowly reclaiming its territory. Claire found a sealed door exactly where Evelyn's letter had described it. Behind the master bedroom, a hallway that should have led to a closet or bathroom instead ended in a door covered by a wooden board nailed across the frame. A sign in Evelyn's handwriting read, "Judy's dressing room, sealed October 1964. Do not open." Maya reached out to touch the board, her fingers tracing the warning. Should we open it now? Claire checked her watch. 4:30 in the afternoon. They need to figure out where they were sleeping tonight, whether the water worked, whether this house was actually livable or just a beautiful wreck that would take years to restore. The sealed room had waited 60 years. It could wait a few more hours. Let's explore the rest first. Make sure we're not going to fall through the floor or get electrocuted or discover. The roof is about to collapse. They continued through the second floor and up to the third floor tower, which turned out to be a single circular room with windows on all sides offering 360-degree views of Los Angeles. The city spread out below them, Century City's towers visible to the south, the Getty Museum to the west, downtown's skyline hazy in the distance. The view alone was worth millions, and it was theirs, this impossible gift from a woman who'd watched Claire's life from a distance and decided she deserved better. The tower room held more of Evelyn's collection. A rack of costumes and garment bags, each one labeled with film title and year. A trunk of jewelry that looked both costume and genuine mixed together. Boxes of fan mail addressed to various stars, some postmarked from the 1940s. Claire ran her fingers over the items, trying to understand the scope of what they'd inherited. This wasn't just a house. This was a museum, a personal archive of Hollywood history accumulated by someone who'd had access and foresight and apparently unlimited storage space. By the time they'd finished the initial exploration, the sun was setting, golden light streaming through dusty windows and making everything look simultaneously more beautiful and more decrepit. Maya's enthusiasm had faded into exhaustion, and Claire's own adrenaline was crashing, leaving her shaky and overwhelmed. They found sheets in a linen closet that smelled of cedar and mothballs, relatively clean beneath the dust. Claire made up 2 beds in adjacent second-floor bedrooms, both of them choosing rooms with views of the overgrown gardens rather than the driveway. The water ran brown for several minutes before clearing, but it ran hot, and the bathroom fixtures, though dated, all worked. They ate peanut butter sandwiches sitting on the floor of the master bedroom, their dinner echoing in the vast, empty space. Maya had gone quiet, processing everything they'd seen, and Claire gave her the space to think. Outside, Los Angeles glittered as darkness fell, millions of lights marking millions of lives being lived in all the normal ways. Down there, people were eating dinner in houses they'd lived in for years, going to jobs they'd held for decades, existing in that comfortable stability Claire had never managed to achieve. But up here, in this abandoned mansion that was somehow now theirs, they had something different. Not stability, not yet, but possibility. The raw material for building something better, if Claire could figure out how. What do you think the other family members will do? Maya asked finally, her voice small in the darkness. I don't know. Try to scare us, probably. Try to make us think we don't deserve this, that we should give it up voluntarily. Claire wrapped an arm around her daughter's shoulders. But Patricia said the will is solid. They can't actually take it from us. But they can make it hard. Yes, they can make it very hard. Claire kissed the top of Maya's head, breathing in the familiar scent of her daughter's shampoo, cheap but clean, a constant through all their various temporary homes. But we've handled hard before. We'll handle again. They slept in their clothes that first night, too tired to dig through boxes for pajamas. Claire lay awake listening to the house settle around them. Wood creaking and wind rattling windows and pipes, making the sounds of a structure not used to having people inside. Somewhere below, something small was probably living in the walls. Mice or rats or possums that had taken advantage of years of vacancy to establish their own residence. The problems they'd face tomorrow seemed enormous. The house needed thousands of dollars in repairs, maybe hundreds of thousands. The property was overwhelming in scope, 15 acres requiring maintenance they couldn't afford. The family members Patricia had warned about would probably appear soon, armed with lawyers and grievances. And somewhere in this mansion full of Hollywood history was a sealed room containing Judy Garland's personal items, the significance of which Claire couldn't begin to calculate. But tonight, for the first time in a year, they had beds in a house they owned. They had running water and electricity and doors they could lock against the world. They had possibility instead of just survival. And whatever tomorrow brought, whatever challenges emerged, they would face them together in a house that was theirs, that couldn't be taken away by an eviction notice or a job loss or bad luck. Claire closed her eyes and let exhaustion pull her under, dreaming of sealed rooms and Golden Age Hollywood, and a woman named Evelyn who'd watched from a distance and decided to give a stranger one final chance at something better. The morning came with Los Angeles sunshine streaming through windows that hadn't been properly cleaned in years, casting patterns of light and shadow across the master bedroom's hardwood floors. Claire woke to the sound of birds, an entire symphony of them that she'd never heard from their studio apartment in North Hollywood, where traffic noise drowned out everything natural. For a moment, she forgot where she was, her body expecting the thin mattress and the smell of mildew that had characterized their last apartment. Then memory returned, the inheritance, the mansion, the sealed dressing room. And she sat up too quickly, her head spinning with the implications of everything that had changed in 24 hours. Maya was already awake, standing at the window with her arms wrapped around herself, looking out at the overgrown gardens that stretched toward the property's edge where the city began its sprawl beyond. She didn't turn when Claire approached, just spoke softly into the morning air. "I had a dream we were back in a Honda. That all of this was just something I made up because I wanted it so badly." Claire pulled her daughter close, both of them looking out at gardens that needed months of work, at fountains choked with weeds, at pathways disappearing under vegetation that had grown wild without human intervention. "It's real, baby. This is real. But for how long?" Maya's question carried the weight of every temporary housing situation they'd endured, every moment of stability that had evaporated when circumstances shifted. What if those family members Patricia mentioned find a way to take it? What if there's something wrong with the will? What if we can't afford to fix everything that's broken? The questions Claire had been avoiding since yesterday crystallized in her daughter's voice. They own a mansion, yes, but they had maybe $800 to their names and no income. The trust fund Evelyn had mentioned would cover basic living expenses for a year, but basic living expenses didn't include structural repairs or pest control or the kind of maintenance a property like this required. They'd traded one kind of precarity for another, exchanging the immediate threat of homelessness for the slower burn of owning something they couldn't afford to maintain. "I don't know," Claire admitted, because lying to Maya had never worked and she wasn't going to start now. "But we're going to figure it out, step by step, starting with understanding what we actually have here." They ate breakfast in the kitchen, cereal with milk that Claire had bought yesterday after leaving Patricia's office, sitting at a Formica table that had probably been cutting-edge design in 1963 and now looked charmingly retro. The refrigerator hummed with a sound that suggested its mechanical life was nearing its end. The faucet dripped despite being fully closed. The overhead light flickered with the irregular rhythm of failing electrical wiring. Each small failure was a reminder that this house, despite its grandeur and history, was fundamentally a collection of systems that needed maintenance they couldn't afford. Maya pulled out a notebook she'd been carrying in her backpack, the same one where she'd documented their various temporary addresses over the past year, and flipped to a fresh page. At the top, she wrote, "House problems," in her careful 12-year-old handwriting. "We should make a list," she said with the practicality that had developed from too many crises requiring systematic problem solving. That way we know what needs fixing and can figure out what's urgent versus what can wait. Claire watched her daughter approach their overwhelming situation with the organized methodology of someone who'd learned that breaking big problems into smaller pieces made them slightly more manageable. It was a skill Maya shouldn't have needed to develop at 12, but poverty was an excellent teacher of resource management and triage. They spent the morning going room by room, documenting issues. The dining room's chandelier hung at an angle, several crystals missing, the chain holding it looking corroded enough that Claire made a mental note to avoid walking directly underneath. The living room's hardwood floors showed water damage in one corner where the roof had probably leaked for months or years before someone had patched it. Several windows throughout the house refused to open, painted shut or swollen with moisture or just broken in ways that weren't immediately obvious. The kitchen revealed more serious problems when Claire opened the cabinet under the sink and found mold growing in dark colonies across the wood. The pipes showed rust, and when she tested the garbage disposal, it made a grinding sound that suggested something was lodged inside or the motor was failing or both. Maya documented everything with the focused intensity she brought to projects that mattered. By noon, her list covered 4 pages in her small, precise handwriting, each item potentially representing hundreds or thousands of dollars they didn't have. They were examining the third-floor tower room, checking for roof leaks by looking for water stains on the ceiling, when they heard the sound of a car coming up the driveway. Claire moved to the window and watched a silver Mercedes navigate the rutted drive with the careful precision of someone afraid of damaging their expensive vehicle. The car stopped in the circular drive, and 3 people emerged, all of them dressed like they were heading to a business meeting rather than visiting an abandoned mansion. "They're here," Claire said, her voice flat with resignation and preemptive defensiveness. "The Harper family." Maya joined her at the window, both of them watching as 2 men and 1 woman approached the front door. The woman was about 45, expensively maintained in that way that suggested regular spa visits and personal trainers and dermatologists who knew their way around Botox. The older man might have been 60, with silver hair and a suit that probably cost more than Claire's Honda. The younger man looked mid-30s, handsome in a generic way, his expression already set in lines of judgment and disapproval. The doorbell echoed through the house with a sound that hadn't been heard in years, the chimes slightly off-key but still functioning. Claire took a breath, squeezed Maya's hand, and headed downstairs to confront the family that had apparently decided she didn't deserve what Evelyn had given her. She opened the door to find the 3 of them standing in a formation that suggested military precision or corporate aggression, the woman slightly in front with the 2 men flanking her like bodyguards or legal backup. Claire Donovan. The woman's voice was professionally warm with an edge underneath, like someone who'd learned to weaponize politeness. "I'm Victoria Harper Stanton. This is my father, Richard Harper, and my brother, James Harper. We're Evelyn's family. We need to talk about this property." Claire's hand tightened on the door handle, but she kept her voice level. "Patricia Westwood said you'd contacted her office. She also said the will was solid and that I should refer all communication to her." Victoria's smile didn't waver, but something flickered in her eyes that might have been irritation or might have been respect for Claire, knowing the legal landscape. "We're not here to contest the will, Claire. We just want to have a conversation, family to family, about what's fair." "We're not family," Claire said, the words coming out harder than she'd intended. "You disowned my mother when she got pregnant with me. You've never contacted me in 33 years. The only reason you're here now is because Evelyn left me something you think should be yours." Richard stepped forward, his expression carefully arranged in lines of paternal concern that probably worked well in boardrooms and on juries, but felt transparently manipulative to Claire, who'd spent years watching people lie to her face about why they couldn't help, couldn't hire her, couldn't extend 1 more week on rent. "Your mother made choices that distanced her from the family, Claire. That wasn't our fault. But this property represents our family's legacy. Evelyn was my sister. She should have consulted us before making such a significant decision about family assets." She consulted 2 psychiatrists about her mental competency, Claire countered, repeating what Patricia had told her. She knew you'd show up making exactly these arguments. She prepared for it. James moved closer, his voice younger and sharper than his father's, less practiced at manipulation and more willing to be direct. You're being selfish. That property is worth tens of millions. You can't possibly manage it properly. The responsible thing would be to sell it and divide the proceeds among all of Linda's descendants. I'm Linda's only descendant, Claire said, her jaw tightening. And Evelyn didn't leave it to Linda's descendants plural. She left it to me, specifically. Victoria tried again, her voice softening into what was probably meant to be sisterly concern, but came across as condescension. Claire, honey, I understand this must be overwhelming. You're in a difficult situation financially, raising a daughter alone, struggling to make ends meet. We're not trying to take anything from you. We just think it would be fair to acknowledge that this inheritance should be shared among family. We could set up a trust, give you a generous annual stipend, take care of the property management and restoration. You'd benefit without having the stress of managing something this complex. The offer was smooth, practiced, probably designed by lawyers who specialized in convincing people to give up assets they legally owned but couldn't defend. Claire had heard variations of this pitch before, when social workers had suggested Maya might be better off in a different placement, when landlords had offered to forgive back rent if Claire would just leave quietly, when debt collectors had proposed payment plans that would have trapped her in obligations for decades. She'd learned to recognize manipulation disguised as help. And she'd learned that the only way to protect herself and Maya was to refuse to engage on terms someone else set. I'm not interested in selling, sharing, or discussing the property with any of you. Evelyn made her wishes clear. I'm honoring them. Now, please leave. Richard's carefully maintained expression cracked slightly, anger bleeding through the professional facade. You're making a mistake. We have resources, connections, lawyers who specialize in estate challenges. Just because the will passed initial probate doesn't mean it can't be contested on other grounds. Undue influence, lack of mental capacity, fraud. There are multiple avenues we can pursue. Then pursue them through your lawyers and mine. Claire started to close the door, but James blocked it with his foot, his earlier facade of reasonableness completely abandoned. You think you deserve this? You're a failed waitress living in your car with a kid who's probably going to end up in the system when you inevitably screw this up. Evelyn was senile. She didn't know what she was doing. We're going to prove that in court, and when we do, you'll be back where you belong, nowhere. Maya appeared behind Claire, her young face set in lines of fury that made her look older than 12. My mom didn't fail at anything. She kept us together when everyone said we should be separated. She kept me in school and fed and safe. And Aunt Evelyn left us this house because she knew my mom was good enough to deserve it. The three Harpers stared at Maya with expressions ranging from surprise to contempt. Victoria recovered first, her voice going sickeningly sweet in that way adults used when talking to children they considered less intelligent. Sweetie, you don't understand grown-up problems. This is complicated. I understand that you want to steal our house, Maya said, her voice steady despite the trembling Claire could feel through their connected hands. I understand that you didn't care about us when we were homeless, but you care now that we have something you want. That's not complicated. That's just mean. James laughed, the sound harsh and cruel. The kid's got spirit. Shame she's going to learn the hard way that spirit doesn't pay property taxes or fix roofs or keep child protective services from asking questions about living conditions. The threat was clear, hanging in the air like smoke. Claire felt rage building in her chest, hot and sharp and barely controlled. She'd spent a year terrified that some well-meaning social worker would decide Maya was better off in foster care, that their car-living situation constituted neglect rather than desperate circumstances. The Harpers had identified her deepest fear and were now weaponizing it. Get off my property, Claire said, her voice low and dangerous. Now, or I call the police and report you for trespassing. Richard pulled out a business card and held it out, his expression hardening into something that no longer bothered pretending at familial concern. When you're ready to be reasonable, call us. We can make this easy, or we can make this very, very difficult. Your choice. Claire took the card only because refusing it seemed petty, but as soon as they'd retreated to their Mercedes and started down the driveway, she tore it into pieces and let them fall like confetti onto the tile entryway. Maya watched the card disappear down the driveway before speaking, her voice small and scared in a way she rarely allowed herself to sound. Can they really take the house? Can they call CPS and say we're not supposed to be here? Claire pulled her daughter into a fierce hug, feeling Maya's heart hammering against her chest. They can try, but we're going to fight them. Patricia said the will is solid, and we're not living in the car anymore. Baby, we have a house with running water and electricity and beds. CPS has no grounds to question our living situation now. But the house needs so much work. What if they say it's not safe for kids? The fear in Maya's voice cut deeper than the Harpers' threats. Claire had spent a year watching her daughter develop anxiety about their housing situation, had seen Maya start checking rental listings online as if a 12-year-old could somehow solve their crisis if she just found the right apartment. The security this house represented was already becoming precious to Maya, and the idea that it could be taken away was reactivating all her trauma from their months of instability. Then we make it safe, Claire said with more confidence than she felt. We fix what's urgent. We document everything. We show that we're responsible property owners who are taking care of the place. With what money, Mom? We have like $800. Claire didn't have an answer for that, so she just held her daughter and stared out at the overgrown gardens and tried to figure out how to protect what they'd been given from people who had resources and lawyers and decades of experience, taking things from people who couldn't defend themselves. They spent the afternoon researching on Maya's phone, which had data that Claire's didn't because Maya's school had provided it as part of a program for low-income students. Claire swallowed her pride and let her 12-year-old navigate them through information about property maintenance, emergency repairs, and what constituted safe living conditions according to California law. The immediate priorities became clear through their research. The roof leaks needed addressing before winter rain started in a few months. The electrical system required inspection and probably updating before they caused a fire. The plumbing issues in the kitchen and several bathrooms needed professional attention. Everything else, the cosmetic damage, the overgrown gardens, the broken windows, could wait. But even the emergency repairs would cost thousands, maybe tens of thousands. The trust fund Evelyn had established would cover their basic living expenses, but Patricia hadn't specified how much was available for property maintenance. Claire made a mental note to call tomorrow and find out exactly what resources they had access to. In the meantime, they could do some work themselves. Claire had learned basic maintenance skills from necessity over the years: unclogging drains, patching drywall, painting, replacing light fixtures. Maya had proven herself handy with research and organization. Together, they might be able to tackle the less technical repairs and save money on labor. They were discussing whether they could safely replace the broken chandelier crystals themselves when Claire's phone rang. Patricia Westwood's name appeared on the screen, and Claire answered with a sense of dread that had become automatic whenever lawyers called. Ms. Donovan, I wanted to inform you that the Harper family has retained legal representation. Gerald Thorne from Thorne & Associates contacted our office this afternoon with notice that they're filing a petition to challenge Evelyn's will on grounds of undue influence and diminished capacity. Claire's stomach dropped. The Harpers had wasted no time moving from verbal threats to legal action. Patricia said they couldn't contest it, that Evelyn had protected against that. She did, and their case is weak. But they're filing anyway, which means we'll need to respond. I've already begun preparing our defense, but I wanted you to be aware that this is happening. The hearing won't be for several months at minimum, but until it's resolved, the estate technically remains in contested status. What does that mean practically? It means you maintain possession and legal rights to the property, but any major decisions like selling or significant alterations would require court approval. It also means they can request documentation, conduct discovery, potentially depose you about your relationship with Evelyn and your financial situation. Claire felt Maya pressed against her side, clearly hearing enough of the conversation to understand they were under attack. I never met Evelyn. I didn't have a relationship with her. How can they claim I had undue influence? They'll argue that her private investigator reports created a false sense of intimacy, that she formed an attachment without truly knowing you, that her judgment was impaired by loneliness and age. It's a standard argument in cases like this, and it rarely succeeds when the testator took precautions like Evelyn did. But it can be expensive and time-consuming to defend against. How expensive? Patricia's pause told Claire everything she needed to know. My firm is willing to work on contingency given the strength of our case, which means we only get paid if we win. But there will be costs you'll need to cover, filing fees, expert witnesses, depositions. Probably between $5,000 and $10,000 over the course of the case. $5,000 to $10,000. Claire had $800 in her bank account and no income. The trust fund might cover it, but that was money meant for keeping them fed and housed. Spending it on legal fees meant less available for everything else, and they already didn't have enough. I'll figure it out, Claire said, because what else could she say? Giving up meant the Harpers won, meant losing the only security she and Maya had been offered in years. What I need to do? For now, nothing. Document any further contact with the Harper family. Don't discuss the case with anyone except me. And Ms. Donovan? I know this is frightening, but Evelyn chose well when she chose you. She wouldn't have left you this property if she didn't think you could protect it. After the call ended, Claire and Maya sat together in the growing darkness, neither of them moving to turn on lights. The house settled around them with its creaks and groans, this massive structure that was simultaneously their salvation and their burden. I'm scared, Maya finally whispered, and the admission cost her pride to make. Me too, baby. Claire pulled her closer. But we're going to be okay. We've survived worse. Have we? Maya's question was genuine, not rhetorical. This feels different. Before, we only had each other to lose. Now we have this house, and it feels like the more we have, the more there is to be taken away. The observation was too mature for a 12-year-old, too accurate in its assessment of how vulnerability scaled with possession. When they'd had nothing, there had been a strange freedom in having nothing left to lose. Now, they had something precious, something that felt like it might anchor them, and the terror of losing it was exponentially greater than the terror of having nothing in the first place. Then we fight harder, Claire said, trying to convince herself as much as her daughter. The Harpers have money and lawyers, but we have something they don't. We have the truth. Evelyn chose us for a reason. She saw something in our lives that made her believe we deserve this. And I'm not going to let her down by giving up just because it's hard. Maya nodded against Claire's shoulder, and they sat together until the last of the daylight faded and Los Angeles lit up below them like a constellation of man-made stars. Somewhere in the city, the Harpers were probably celebrating their legal filing, confident that their resources would eventually overwhelm Claire's determination. Somewhere, Patricia was building their defense, assembling evidence that would prove Evelyn's competency and Claire's worthiness. And here, in this mansion full of Hollywood history and neglect and possibility, Claire and Maya were learning that inheriting something precious meant inheriting the fight to keep it. That gifts came with obligations. That security was never free. They eventually made dinner from the limited groceries they'd bought. More sandwiches and fruit and cheap cookies that Maya loved. They ate in the kitchen while going through Evelyn's papers, looking for anything that might help their case. Bills and receipts and correspondence that documented a long life lived with intention and care, a woman who'd maintained this property and its contents with meticulous attention despite living elsewhere for years. Maya found a photo album tucked into a drawer, leather-bound and heavy, filled with pictures spanning decades. Young Evelyn at studio events, posing with stars whose faces Claire vaguely recognized from classic films. Older Evelyn at charity functions and premieres, always elegant, always slightly apart from the crowd. And scattered throughout, candid shots of Judy Garland at various stages of her career and life, some professional, some intimate, Judy laughing, Judy performing, Judy looking exhausted, Judy with her children. The final pages of the album held recent photos, and Claire's breath caught when she recognized herself. A high school graduation photo she didn't remember anyone taking. Maya as a toddler at a park, Claire pushing her on a swing. The two of them at a bus stop, Maya's backpack almost as large as she was, Claire's face showing exhaustion and determination in equal measure. Evelyn had been watching, documenting, collecting evidence of their lives the way she collected Hollywood memorabilia. The private investigator reports Patricia mentioned had apparently included photographic surveillance, and Evelyn had preserved these images of strangers she decided were family despite never meeting them. She really did care about us, Maya said softly, tracing the image of herself as a younger child. From far away, but she cared. Claire felt tears threatening and blinked them back. Evelyn's distance, while alive, felt like a missed opportunity, a relationship they'd never have. But her gift was present and tangible. This house, this security, this chance at stability. Maybe that was Evelyn's way of loving from a distance, giving what she could in the form she could manage. They eventually headed upstairs to sleep, both of them exhausted by the emotional weight of the day. Claire checked that all the doors were locked, a habit from their time, being vulnerable that would probably never fully leave her. The house felt different at night, larger and more mysterious, full of sounds that weren't quite identifiable as threatening or benign. She stood in the doorway of Maya's chosen bedroom and watched her daughter brush her hair with the careful attention of someone who'd learned to maintain small rituals of normalcy regardless of circumstances. Maya caught her reflection in the antique mirror and smiled, tired but genuine. "Tomorrow we should open the sealed room," Maya said, setting down her brush. "Judy Garland's dressing room. We should see what's there." Claire nodded, understanding that her daughter needed forward momentum, needed to feel like they were doing something rather than just waiting for the Harpers' next attack. "Tomorrow, first thing after breakfast. Do you think it'll be valuable? What's inside?" "I don't know. But valuable or not, it's ours now. Evelyn trusted us with it." Maya climbed into bed, pulling Evelyn's quilts up to her chin. "I hope it's good. I hope it's something that proves we should be here, that we deserve this." Claire kissed her daughter's forehead, smoothing hair back from her face. "We deserve this whether there's anything in that room or not." Evelyn said so. That's enough. But as Claire lay in her own bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the house breathe around her, she couldn't help hoping Maya was right. That whatever waited behind that sealed door would be significant enough, valuable enough, meaningful enough to justify the fight they were facing. That opening, it would reveal something that made everything else make sense. Evelyn's choice, the Harpers' aggression, the impossible gift that had landed in their laps just when they needed it most. Tomorrow they would find out. Tomorrow they would break the seal that had held for 60 years and discover what Judy Garland had left behind, what Evelyn had preserved, what fate or luck or cosmic timing had decided to give them. Claire closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but her mind kept returning to that sealed door and the possibilities behind it. Hollywood history, personal items, things valuable enough that Evelyn had bought an entire estate to protect them. The implications were too large to fully process, the potential too overwhelming to believe. But tomorrow they would know. Tomorrow the sealed room would give up its secrets, and Claire and Maya would understand what they'd really inherited when Evelyn Harper decided a homeless single mother and her daughter deserved a mansion full of mysteries. Outside, Los Angeles continued its eternal sprawl, indifferent to the small drama playing out in the hills above. Inside, two people who'd learned to survive on hope and determination slept in beds that were theirs, in rooms that couldn't be taken away by anything except the Harpers' determination to claim what they'd never earned. The sealed door waited in the darkness, patient after decades, ready to reveal whether this inheritance was just a house or something far more significant, ready to show whether Evelyn's faith in Claire had been justified, whether the gift was as precious as the letter suggested, whether two people who'd had nothing could suddenly have everything. Tomorrow would bring answers. Tonight brought rest, however fitful, however haunted by questions and fears and the particular anxiety that came from having something worth losing. The house settled into silence around them. This mansion full of history, holding two more stories now. A homeless mother and daughter who'd been given one last chance at stability and whatever secrets Judy Garland had left behind 60 years ago when she'd walked away from this place and never looked back. Morning arrived with fog rolling through the canyons, turning the overgrown gardens into something ethereal and slightly unreal. Claire woke before Maya, her mind already racing with everything the day would bring. The sealed room, the Harper's legal challenge, the mounting list of repairs they couldn't afford. Each problem felt enormous in the pre-dawn darkness, but she forced herself to focus on what she could control, getting up, making breakfast, facing one challenge at a time. Maya appeared in the kitchen doorway, still wearing yesterday's clothes, her hair unbrushed and her expression carrying the determined focus of someone who'd made a decision while sleeping. "We're opening it today, right? The dressing room?" "Yes." Claire poured cereal into mismatched bowls she'd found in the cabinets, probably Evelyn's dishes from the 1970s, still perfectly functional despite decades of disuse. Right after breakfast, they ate quickly, neither of them particularly hungry, but both understanding that whatever they found behind that sealed door might change everything. The anticipation was almost unbearable, a mixture of hope and dread that made Claire's hands shake slightly as she washed their bowls in the deep farmhouse sink. The second floor felt different in morning light, less mysterious and more shabby, the wear and neglect visible in ways darkness had hidden. Claire and Maya stood in front of the sealed door, studying the wooden board that had been nailed across it 60 years ago. Evelyn's warning, "Do not open," seemed less ominous now and more like a promise. Whatever was behind this door, Evelyn had deemed it important enough to preserve untouched for 6 decades. "Should we say something?" Maya asked, her voice hushed as if they were entering a church or a tomb. "Like before we open it?" Claire considered, then nodded. "Thank you, Evelyn, for trusting us with this. We'll take care of whatever we find." She'd brought a hammer and crowbar from a toolbox she'd discovered in the garage, and she set to work prying the board loose. The nails came out with sharp squeals, the wood splintering slightly where it had been nailed directly into the doorframe. Each nail removed felt like breaking a seal on something sacred, like they were violating Evelyn's wishes even though her letter had explicitly told them to open it. The final nail gave way, and the board clattered to the floor, raising dust that made both of them cough. Behind it, a simple door with a crystal doorknob, the kind that was common in 1920s construction. Claire's hand hesitated on the knob, suddenly terrified of what they might find. What if the room was empty? What if whatever had been valuable had deteriorated over 60 years? What if this whole thing was just Evelyn's romanticized memory of a friendship that hadn't actually left behind anything significant? "Mom," Maya's hand covered Claire's on the doorknob. "Whatever's in there, we'll figure it out together." Claire turned the knob. The door opened smoothly, hinges well-oiled despite decades of disuse, and they stepped into Judy Garland's private dressing room. The space was smaller than Claire had imagined, maybe 12 feet by 15, but it had been designed with obvious luxury. The walls were covered in fabric, silk that had faded to a soft rose color, water-stained in places but still beautiful. A built-in vanity dominated one wall, the mirror surrounded by light bulbs that no longer worked, the surface still holding bottles and jars from 1964, their contents long dried or evaporated. Clothing racks lined 2 walls, garment bags protecting what appeared to be dozens of dresses and gowns. A steamer trunk sat in one corner, its leather straps still buckled. Hat boxes were stacked against another wall, each one labeled in elegant handwriting that might have been Judy's or might have been her assistant's. And everywhere, the smell of old perfume and time, not unpleasant but heavy with the weight of decades, undisturbed. Maya moved to the vanity, her fingers hovering over the bottles without touching. "Mom, look, these still have makeup in them." Claire joined her, examining containers of foundation and rouge and lipstick from brands that probably didn't exist anymore or had evolved so much they were unrecognizable. A hairbrush sat beside the makeup, strands of dark hair still caught in its bristles. Judy Garland's actual hair, preserved accidentally when she'd left this room for the last time 60 years ago. The intimacy of it hit Claire hard, the realization that they were standing in a space Judy Garland had occupied, touching things she'd touched, breathing air that contained molecular traces of her presence. This wasn't just Hollywood history. This was personal, human, the preserved remains of a life that had been both extraordinary and tragic. "Should we open the garment bags?" Maya asked, already moving toward the clothing racks. Carefully, Claire's hands trembled as she unzipped the first bag, revealing a dress that made her breath catch. Deep blue silk covered in hand-sewn beading, the kind of gown that would have been worn to a premiere or an award show. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, each bead individually attached, the silk still lustrous despite its age. They opened bag after bag, revealing a wardrobe that spanned Judy's later career. Stage costumes from concerts, elegant cocktail dresses, casual daywear that still carried price tags from boutiques that no longer existed. Each piece was a work of art, and each piece was potentially worth thousands of dollars to collectors. The steamer trunk required more effort to open. Its locks rusted shut until Claire applied WD-40 she'd found in the garage toolbox. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper that crumbled at their touch, were items that seemed more personal than the clothing. A leather-bound journal with Judy's name embossed on the cover. Photographs in envelopes marked with dates and names. Letters tied with ribbon. The handwriting on the envelopes belonging to people Claire didn't recognize, but who'd clearly been important enough to Judy for her to save their correspondence. Maya carefully lifted the journal, opening it to a random page filled with Judy's handwriting. Small, precise, slightly slanted. The entry was dated March 1963. Another disappointing recording session. "My voice isn't what it was, and everyone knows it. They're too polite to say anything, but I can see it in their faces. I'm 40 years old and already past my prime. What happens to people like me when the spotlight moves on?" The words were heartbreaking in their vulnerability. This woman who'd been one of the biggest stars in Hollywood history, doubting her own worth. Maya closed the journal gently, as if touching those words too long might somehow violate Judy's privacy even 6 decades after her death. "This feels wrong," Maya said quietly, reading her private thoughts. "She didn't leave these for us. She just forgot them here." Claire understood her daughter's discomfort, but she also understood that these items now belonged to them, that Evelyn had preserved them specifically so they wouldn't be lost or destroyed. "We don't have to read them, but we should at least catalog what's here." The hat boxes yielded more treasures. Not just hats, though, but there were dozens of those, pillbox hats and wide-brimmed sun hats, and elaborate fascinators with feathers and netting, but also jewelry. Costume pieces mixed with what appeared to be genuine gems, all of it jumbled together, as if Judy had been in a hurry when packing, or perhaps just careless with possessions she no longer valued the way others would. One box contained something that made Claire's heart stop, a pair of shoes. Not just any shoes, but ruby slippers. Not the original pair from The Wizard of Oz, but similar, clearly custom-made, with JG embroidered in gold thread inside each heel. They were performance shoes, probably from one of Judy's later concerts when she would recreate moments from her most famous role. Maya picked up one slipper, turning it in the morning light streaming through the room's single window. The sequins caught the light, throwing tiny red reflections across the walls. "These are like the ones from a movie. They might be worth a fortune." Claire's voice came out hushed, awed by what they were discovering. Anything connected to Wizard of Oz, especially personal items that belonged to Judy, they sell for hundreds of thousands at auction. They continued their exploration with growing amazement and mounting anxiety. Each discovery raised the stakes of what they'd inherited. This wasn't just a house. This wasn't just memorabilia. This was a treasure trove of Hollywood history that museums and collectors would fight over, that the Harpers would absolutely claim should have been divided among family rather than given to Claire alone. In a drawer built into the vanity, Claire found something that made her sit down hard on the floor, her legs suddenly unable to support her. File folders, each one containing contracts and financial documents from Judy's career. Payment records from MGM. Royalty statements from record sales. And most significantly, original contracts signed by Judy Garland herself, documents that proved ownership and rights to various performances and recordings. Maya, get your phone. We need to photograph all of this. They spent the next 3 hours documenting everything, taking hundreds of photos from multiple angles. Each garment, each piece of jewelry, each document, each personal item. Claire's phone battery died halfway through, and they switched to Maya's, both of them understanding that documentation was crucial not just for their own records, but for the legal battle that was coming. By noon, they had a rough inventory that made Claire's head spin with the implications. 47 garments, including stage costumes, and personal clothing, 32 hats, in various styles jewelry that range from obvious costume pieces to items that might be genuine diamonds and rubies, the ruby slippers, personal correspondence, including letters from other Hollywood legends, 5 journals covering different periods of Judy's life, photographs spanning her entire career, many previously unpublished financial documents and contracts, makeup, perfume, and personal grooming items, sheet music with handwritten notes in Judy's handwriting. The value of even a conservative estimate was staggering. Costume pieces for major stars regularly sold for tens of thousands. The ruby slippers alone could be worth $500,000 or more. The journals and letters, if they contained significant revelations or insights, could be worth hundreds of thousands to archivists and biographers. The contracts and financial documents had both historical value and potentially ongoing legal significance if they established rights that were still relevant. They were sitting on millions of dollars worth of material, possibly tens of millions, depending on how authentication went and what the market would bear. Mom, Maya's voice was small and scared. This changes everything, doesn't it? Claire nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. Yesterday, the Harpers had been fighting over a mansion and some general Hollywood memorabilia. Once they found out about this room, about what it contained, the legal battle would intensify exponentially. They'd argue that Claire had manipulated Evelyn, that no sane person would leave this much value to a stranger, that the discovery proved the will should be voided. And they might be right. A court might look at this situation. A homeless single mother inheriting potentially $50 or $100 million in Hollywood memorabilia from a distant relative she'd never met, and decide it was too improbable, too convenient, too much like a scam to be legitimate. Claire's phone, now recharged from a power bank Maya had thought to bring, buzzed with an incoming call. Patricia. Westwood's name appeared on the screen, and Claire answered with shaking hands. Ms. Donovan, I have some concerning news. The Harpers have filed an emergency motion requesting immediate access to the property for their own appraisal and inventory. They're claiming that valuable items may be at risk of damage or theft, and that as potential heirs, they have a right to ensure the estate is being properly maintained. We just found Judy Garland's sealed dressing room, Claire said, the words tumbling out in a rush. Patricia, there's millions of dollars worth of stuff in here. Costumes, jewelry, personal items, journals, documents. I don't even know how to begin estimating the value, but it's significant, really significant. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that Claire thought the connection had dropped. Then Patricia's voice came back, carefully controlled. You need to secure that room immediately. Don't let anyone else inside. Don't move anything. Don't show anyone the photos you took. This discovery changes the entire landscape of the case. Ow! Because now the Harpers have even more incentive to challenge the will, and they'll use the value of what you found to argue that Evelyn couldn't possibly have been in her right mind to leave this to you. But it also strengthens our case, because it proves Evelyn knew exactly what she was doing. She sealed that room in 1964 and preserved it specifically for her heir. That's not the action of someone with diminished capacity. That's deliberate, careful planning. The judge granted their motion for access. Claire felt panic rising in her chest. They're coming here. The hearing is scheduled for next week. But Claire, you need to get professional appraisals done before then. We need expert witnesses who can testify to the value and significance of what you found, who can explain why these items need to be preserved exactly as they are, why moving them or allowing multiple people access would damage their historical integrity. I don't know any Hollywood memorabilia experts. I don't know where to even start. I do. Patricia's voice carried the kind of confidence that came from decades of high-stakes legal work. I'm going to make some calls. Expect someone from Sotheby's to contact you this afternoon. They have specialists in entertainment memorabilia who can do a preliminary assessment. In the meantime, lock that room. Don't discuss it with anyone. And Ms. Donovan, this discovery might have just made you a very wealthy woman, but it's also made you a much bigger target. After the call ended, Claire and Maya stood in the dressing room doorway, looking at the treasures they'd uncovered. The ruby slippers caught the light, throwing red reflections across the faded silk walls. Judy Garland's journals sat in their trunk, holding secrets that hadn't been read in 60 years. Contracts and photographs and personal items all waiting to be examined, authenticated, valued. We need to lock this room and not tell anyone what we found, Claire said, hearing the strain in her own voice. Not until Patricia's experts come. What about the Harpers? If they get access to the house, they'll find this room. The board's already off the door. Claire looked at the wooden board lying on the floor where she dropped it. We put it back. Make it look like it's still sealed. They don't know we've been in here. They spent the next hour carefully replacing the board, using the same nail holes so it would appear undisturbed. Claire hammered the nails back in with hands that shook from adrenaline and stress, each strike of the hammer feeling like she was sealing away a fortune she'd barely gotten a glimpse. When they finished, the hallway looked exactly as it had before, a sealed door with Evelyn's warning still visible, giving no indication that it had been opened or that they'd discovered what lay behind it. They were eating a late lunch in the kitchen, both of them too nervous to have much appetite, when Maya's phone rang. An unknown number, but Claire had learned over the past 24 hours that unknown numbers now meant important people trying to reach them. So Maya answered on speaker. Is this Claire Donovan's residence? A man's voice, older, with the careful pronunciation of someone who'd spent their life in academia or high-level professional work. This is her daughter Maya. My mom's right here. Excellent. My name is Dr. Harrison Webb. I'm a senior specialist in entertainment memorabilia at Sotheby's Los Angeles office. Patricia Westwood contacted me about a significant discovery you've made on your property. I'd like to arrange a time to come assess what you've found, ideally this afternoon, if that's possible. Claire took the phone from Maya, her heart hammering. Dr. Webb, I appreciate you calling, but I need to ask, how do I know I can trust you? The family contesting the will is aggressive, and I can't have information about what we found getting back to them. A wise precaution. Webb's voice warmed slightly, approval evident in his tone. I've worked with Patricia on several high-profile estate cases, and I can assure you that anything I observe is protected by attorney-client privilege since I'm working as an expert consultant for your legal team. Additionally, Sotheby's has strict confidentiality protocols. What you found won't be discussed with anyone outside your legal team without your explicit written permission. How soon can you get here? I'm 40 minutes away. I've cleared my afternoon schedule. Claire gave him the address and spent the next 40 minutes pacing the first floor, her mind racing through scenarios. What if Webb determined the items were fake? What if everything they'd found was worthless reproduction material? What if the value was significant, but not enough to justify Evelyn's faith in her, not enough to prove to a court that she deserved this inheritance? Maya sat at the kitchen table with her notebook, adding to her list of house problems as a way of managing her own anxiety. The normalcy of the gesture, her daughter documenting a broken window latch while they waited for an expert to potentially tell them they'd inherited millions, was so absurd that Claire felt hysterical laughter bubbling up in her throat. Dr. Harrison Webb arrived in a silver Volvo, emerging from his car with the careful movements of someone in his late 60s who'd learned to protect aging joints. He was tall and distinguished, with white hair and wire-rimmed glasses, dressed in slacks and a button-down shirt that managed to look both casual and expensive. He carried a leather briefcase that had seen decades of use, but had been maintained with obvious care. Claire met him at the door, offering her hand and trying to project confidence she didn't feel. Dr. Webb, thank you for coming on such short notice. Please call me Harrison. His handshake was firm but brief, his attention already moving past Claire to the interior of the house visible behind her. Patricia mentioned that Evelyn Harper had accumulated significant Hollywood memorabilia over her career. I actually knew Evelyn slightly, years ago. She had an excellent eye for items that would appreciate in value. He stepped inside, and Claire watched his expression shift from professional courtesy to genuine interest as he took in the entry hall with its stacked boxes and covered furniture and a general atmosphere of a collection that had outgrown its container. "This is just the general collection," Claire explained, gesturing to the visible items. "What we found is separate, in a sealed room that Evelyn preserved specifically." "Show me." They led him upstairs, Maya carrying his briefcase while Harrison climbed with the careful attention of someone who'd learned not to trust his knees on stairs. When they reached the sealed door, he stopped, studying Evelyn's handwriting with an expression Claire couldn't quite read. "She sealed this in 1964? His voice had gone quiet, almost reverent. "According to her letter to me, yes. The day after Judy Garland moved out." Harrison turned to look at Claire directly, his eyes sharp behind his glasses. "Judy Garland lived here for less than 2 years, from 1962 to 1964. Evelyn bought the property from her estate after financial troubles forced a sale. According to Evelyn's letter, Judy left personal items behind, and Evelyn sealed this room to preserve them." "And you haven't shown this to anyone else? The Harper family doesn't know about it?" "No one knows except you, Patricia, and us." Harrison nodded, approval evident in the gesture. "Then let's see what Evelyn protected." Claire removed the board again, the nails coming out more easily this time since she just put them back in. The door opened, and Harrison stepped into the dressing room with the careful steps of someone entering a sacred space. He stood in the center of the room for a long moment, just looking, his breathing the only sound. Then he moved to the vanity, examining the makeup and perfume bottles without touching them. He studied the garment bags, the hat boxes, the steamer trunk. When his eyes landed on the ruby slippers, visible on a shelf where Maya had carefully placed them, his hand went to his chest as if his heart had skipped. "May I?" He gestured to the slippers. "Of course." He lifted one with a delicacy that suggested he was handling something infinitely precious and fragile. Turned it in the light, examined the embroidered initials inside, set it down gently, and pulled out a jeweler's loupe from his briefcase to examine the sequins more closely. "These are stage-worn," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Probably from her 1967 or 1968 concerts when she was recreating Wizard of Oz moments. The wear pattern on the sole is consistent with stage performance. The sequins are hand-applied using a technique that was standard in the 1960s but isn't commonly used anymore." "Are they valuable?" Harrison looked at Claire with an expression that was equal parts amusement and disbelief. "Ms. Donovan, these slippers alone are worth somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million, depending on provenance and auction conditions. If we can prove they were worn during specific recorded performances, the value increases substantially." The number was so large that Claire's brain refused to process it. She heard Maya make a small sound beside her, shock rather than excitement. Harrison spent the next 2 hours examining everything in the room, taking photographs with a professional camera he pulled from his briefcase, making notes in a leather notebook with handwriting as precise as his movements. He opened the journals, but didn't read them extensively, just enough to verify they were Judy's handwriting and contained substantive content. He examined the contracts and financial documents with particular care, explaining that original signed documents from this era were increasingly rare and valuable. When he finally straightened up, his expression was that of someone who'd just witnessed something extraordinary. "Ms. Donovan, what you have here is one of the most significant private collections of Judy Garland memorabilia I've ever encountered. The costumes alone represent hundreds of thousands of dollars in value. The jewelry will need to be individually assessed by a gemologist, but even assuming most of it is costume, there's substantial value. The ruby slippers are museum quality. The journals and letters." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Those have both historical and monetary value that's difficult to quantify without extensive review, but we're talking about primary source material for one of the 20th century's most important entertainers. How much? Claire's voice came out barely above a whisper. In total, a conservative estimate without individual appraisals and assuming moderate auction conditions, I would value this collection at between $25 and $40 million. If certain items prove to be more significant than initial examination suggests, if the journals contain revelations that would interest biographers, if the contracts establish rights that are still relevant, the value could easily exceed $50 million. The room tilted slightly. Maya's hand found Claire's and squeezed hard enough to hurt. $50 million. They'd gone from homeless to potentially one of the wealthiest families in Los Angeles in the span of 48 hours, and the whiplash was making Claire feel physically sick. But Harrison continued, his tone shifting to something more serious. You need to understand that this discovery will make your legal situation significantly more complicated. The Harpers will argue that no rational person would leave this much value to a distant relative they'd never met. They'll claim Evelyn was delusional or manipulated. They'll fight harder than they would have for just the property. Patricia said the same thing. Patricia's right. You need to be prepared for this to get very ugly very quickly. Harrison packed his camera and notebook back into his briefcase. I'll prepare a preliminary appraisal report for the court hearing next week. In the meantime, I strongly suggest you consider having this room secured professionally. Climate control, security system, insurance. These items are essentially unprotected right now. With what money? The question came out sharper than Claire intended. I'm unemployed. I have less than $1,000 in my bank account. The trust fund Evelyn left covers living expenses, not professional conservation services. Harrison studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. I may be able to help with that. Sotheby's occasionally provides conservation services for significant collections while they're still in private hands, particularly when there's a likelihood of eventual sale through our auction house. Given what you have here, I think I can make a case to my superiors that this collection warrants that level of attention. Why would you do that? You don't know me. No, but I knew Evelyn. She was difficult and particular and absolutely brilliant at identifying valuable items that others overlooked. If she chose you for this inheritance, if she preserved this collection for 60 years specifically for you to find, then she saw something. And frankly, having witnessed your caution about protecting these items, your reluctance to monetize them immediately, your concern about doing right by Evelyn's intent, I think she chose well. After Harrison left, promising to return the next day with conservation specialists and security consultants, Claire and Maya sat together on the floor of the master bedroom, backs against the wall, both of them too overwhelmed to move. $50 million, Maya said, testing the words. That's not real. That can't be real. Harrison seemed to think it. Was conservative. Mom, what do we do with $50 million? Claire had no answer. Her entire adult life had been defined by scarcity, by making impossible choices about which bills to pay and which to ignore, by stretching resources that were never adequate. The idea of abundance on that scale was so foreign to her experience that she couldn't even begin to imagine what it would mean practically. We don't have it yet, she said finally. We have to win the court case first. We have to prove we deserve it. Do we deserve it? Maya's question was genuine, not rhetorical. I mean, what do we do to earn $50 million? We just existed. We were homeless and struggling, and Evelyn decided we deserved this. But why? What makes us special? The question cut to the heart of Claire's own discomfort with the inheritance. She'd spent her adult life being told, implicitly and explicitly, that poverty was a personal failure, that people who struggled financially had made bad choices, lacked discipline, weren't trying hard enough. The dominant narrative around wealth and poverty suggested that people got what they deserved, that success was earned and failure was chosen. And now she'd been handed tens of millions of dollars, not because of anything she'd done, but because a distant relative had watched her struggle and decided she deserved better. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. I don't know, Claire admitted. Maybe Evelyn saw that we kept trying to spite everything. Maybe she saw that we stayed together when it would have been easier to let the system separate us. Maybe she just wanted to give someone a chance who'd never been given one before. But other people struggle too. Other people are homeless and trying hard and keeping their families together. Why us and not them? Claire pulled Maya closer, this thoughtful, ethical 12-year-old who was grappling with questions about fairness and desert that most adults never bothered to consider. I don't know, baby, but I'll tell you what I think we should do with it if we get to keep it. We should use some of it to help other people who are where we were. We should make Evelyn's gift mean something beyond just us being comfortable. Maya nodded against her shoulder, like a foundation or something, to help homeless families. Yeah, like that. They sat together as afternoon faded to evening, both of them processing the day's discoveries and trying to imagine a future that looked nothing like their past. The sealed room held secrets worth millions. The Harpers were coming with lawyers and accusations. Harrison Webb was mobilizing conservation experts and security systems. And somewhere in the legal machinery of Los Angeles County, a judge would eventually have to decide whether a homeless single mother deserved the fortune that fate and a dead woman's kindness had dropped in her lap. Claire's phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. Harrison's preliminary report is extraordinary. This strengthens our case significantly. But be prepared. When the Harpers find out what you discovered, they'll escalate. Stay strong. Maya read the text over Claire's shoulder. How much worse can it get? Claire didn't answer because she'd learned over the past year that things could always get worse, that rock bottom had a basement, that assuming you'd hit the worst of it was usually when the universe decided to prove you wrong. But they'd also learned that they were stronger than they believed possible, that survival was a skill you developed through practice, that having each other meant they could face almost anything. The sealed room waited in the darkness, its treasures documented and photographed and appraised. Tomorrow, Harrison would return with people who would secure it properly, protect it from deterioration and theft and the Harpers' grasping hands. Tomorrow, they take another step toward either keeping this impossible gift or losing it to people who thought blood and money mattered more than Evelyn's explicit wishes. Tonight, they had a house that was theirs and knowledge that potentially secured their future. Tonight, they had each other and the memory of Evelyn's faith in them. Tonight, they had survived another day of overwhelming circumstances and come through intact. Claire stood up, offering her hand to Maya. Come on, let's make dinner and pretend we're normal people for a few hours. We're never going to be normal again, are we? Maya took her hand anyway, letting herself be pulled to her feet. Probably not, but we'll be okay. We've been not normal before. We're good at it. They descended to the kitchen, leaving the sealed room and its millions of dollars in memorabilia behind locked doors and replaced boards. Whatever tomorrow brought, whatever the Harpers tried, whatever the courts decided, they would face it together. Because that's what they'd always done. And $50 million in potential inheritance didn't change the fundamental truth that had gotten them through the past year. They were stronger together than any force that tried to break them apart. The next morning brought Harrison Webb and his team, 3 conservation specialists in white coats carrying equipment cases, and 2 security consultants who immediately began assessing the house for vulnerabilities. Claire and Maya watched from the hallway as the specialists entered the sealed room with the reverence of archaeologists entering a tomb, their movements careful and deliberate. Dr. Sarah Chun, the lead conservator, was younger than Claire expected, maybe 40, with her hair pulled back in a severe bun and an intensity that suggested she took her work very seriously. She examined each item with instruments Claire didn't recognize, taking measurements and samples and photographs, documenting everything with scientific precision. The silk wall covering has significant water damage in the northeast corner, she reported to Harrison, who was observing from the doorway. We'll need to stabilize it before it deteriorates further. The garments are in remarkably good condition considering the storage conditions, but several show signs of fiber degradation that will accelerate without climate control. One of the security consultants, a man named Marcus Chun who appeared to be Sarah's husband based on their easy interaction, approached Claire with a tablet showing a floor plan of the house. Ms. Donovan, I'd like to recommend a comprehensive security system. Cameras at all entry points, motion sensors in high-value areas, reinforced locks on the doors and first-floor windows. Given what you have here, you're looking at a significant theft risk. How much would that cost? Marcus consulted his tablet. For the level of security this collection requires, approximately $25,000 for installation plus monthly monitoring fees of around $200. Claire's stomach dropped. $25,000. She had $800 in her bank account and a trust fund that covered basic living expenses but not security systems. The gap between what they needed and what they could afford felt insurmountable. Harrison must have seen her expression because he stepped in smoothly. As I mentioned yesterday, Sotheby's can provide conservation and security services as part of our eventual sale agreement. Ms. Donovan, if you're willing to commit to selling the collection through our auction house when the legal issues are resolved, we confront the costs and recoup them from the sale proceeds. It felt like a devil's bargain, committing to sell items she'd barely gotten to examine. But Claire also understood she had no real choice. Without proper security, they risked losing everything to theft. Without conservation, the items would deteriorate, and they couldn't afford either service without Sotheby's help. What percentage would Sotheby's take? Our standard commission for collections of this value is 10% of the final sale price. Given the conservation and security costs we're absorbing up front, I'd propose 12%. Claire did the math quickly. 12% of $50 million was $6 million. A staggering amount, but it still left them with more money than she could conceptualize. And without Harrison's help, they might lose everything anyway. Okay, but I wanted in writing that the conservation work takes precedence over sale preparation. These items meant something to Evelyn and to Judy Garland. They deserved to be preserved properly regardless of their market value. Harrison smiled, genuine warmth in the expression. Ms. Donovan, you just proved again why Evelyn chose well. We have a deal. The contract was drawn up that afternoon, reviewed by Patricia, and signed by evening. By the next morning, workers were installing cameras and sensors while the conservation team began the painstaking process of documenting and stabilizing the collection. Claire and Maya stayed out of the way, watching professionals swarm through the house with equipment and expertise, transforming their abandoned mansion into something that resembled a museum undergoing restoration. The scope of the operation was both impressive and overwhelming, a visible manifestation of how dramatically their lives had changed. On the third day, while conservation work continued upstairs, Claire received a call from a number she didn't recognize. She answered cautiously, expecting another lawyer or consultant or expert. Claire Donovan? A woman's voice, older, with a slight tremor that suggested age or emotion or both. Speaking. My name is Margaret Wilson. I was Judy Garland's dresser from 1965 to 1969. Harrison Webb contacted me about items you found that belonged to Judy. I'd like to come see them, if you'd allow it. I promise I'm not trying to claim anything. I like to see her things again, to know they've been cared for. The request caught Claire off guard. She'd been so focused on the monetary value and legal implications that she'd lost sight of the human dimension. These items had belonged to a real person, had been touched and worn and valued by someone who'd had relationships and history, and people who'd loved her. Of course you can see them. When would you like to come? Margaret arrived the next afternoon, a woman in her mid-80s with carefully styled white hair and elegant clothes that suggested comfortable retirement. She moved slowly but with dignity, accepting Maya's offered arm to help her up the stairs without apparent embarrassment. When she entered the dressing room and saw the vanity with Judy's makeup still arranged on its surface, she stopped, her hand going to her mouth. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she made no effort to hide them. "Oh, Judy," she whispered to the empty room. "You left these behind. I wonder what happened to them." Claire and Maya hung back, giving Margaret space to remember. She moved to the clothing racks, running her fingers over the garment bags with a touch that was both tender and familiar. "I helped her pack when she left this house in 1964. She was in a terrible state, depressed, anxious about money, fighting with her managers. She told me to just leave the dressing room, that she couldn't bear to sort through it, that she'd come back for things later." Margaret's voice caught. She never did. She moved to London shortly after, and then there were other houses, other crises. I don't think she ever thought about these items again. Were you with her when she died? Maya asked softly. No, sweetheart. By then she'd let most of her staff go. She died alone in London, with just her last husband nearby. Margaret wiped her eyes with a handkerchief she'd pulled from her purse. Judy was the most talented person I ever knew, and one of the most troubled. She deserved better than what life gave her. She picked up one of the journals, holding it like it was infinitely precious. May I read a little? Just to hear her voice again? Claire nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Margaret opened to a random page and read aloud. Judy's word from 1963 coming to life in Margaret's wavering voice. Margaret helped me choose a dress for tonight's performance. She has better taste than I do, knows what flatters and what's just desperation. I'm so tired, but the audience is waiting, and that's the only thing that's ever made sense. The moment when the lights come up and I step on stage and become who they need me to be. She wrote about me, Margaret said, wonder and grief mixing in her expression. I didn't know she wrote about me. They spent an hour together, Margaret sharing stories about Judy while examining items that held personal meaning. The ruby slippers had been Judy's favorite, apparently. She'd worn them at concerts when she wanted to feel connected to her most famous role, but couldn't bear to perform the actual song, Over the Rainbow, because it made her too emotional. The journals documented struggles with addiction, relationships, money, fame, all the pressures that had eventually contributed to Judy's death at 47. Reading them felt voyeuristic, but Margaret explained that Judy had always been open about her problems, had given interviews discussing her challenges because she believed honesty might help others struggling with similar issues. She'd want these preserved, Margaret said finally. She'd want people to understand that fame doesn't protect you from pain, that success doesn't solve your problems. If these journals help people understand her complexity, help them see beyond the image to the person, she'd approve of that. Before she left, Margaret pressed a business card into Claire's hand. If you ever need someone to authenticate items or provide context about Judy's life during this period, please call me. And Ms. Donovan, thank you for caring for her things. Thank you for not just seeing them as dollar signs. After Margaret left, Claire found Maya in the library, surrounded by boxes of photographs from Evelyn's general collection. Her daughter looked up with red eyes, clearly having been crying. This is all so sad, Mom. Judy Garland had all this talent and fame and money, and she still died young and unhappy. Evelyn spent her whole life collecting things instead of connecting with people. Even the inheritance, Evelyn gave us this gift, but she gave it from a distance. She never met us, never held you as a baby, or saw me grow up. Everyone in this story seems lonely. Claire sat down beside her daughter, pulling her close. Yeah, but maybe that's why Evelyn wanted us to have this. Maybe she saw us struggling but staying together, and she wanted to give us the resources to avoid becoming lonely like she did. Maybe the whole point is that we're supposed to do better, be different, use what we've been given to build connection instead of just accumulating things. Maya nodded against her shoulder. Can we keep some of Judy's items? Not sell everything? Something to remember that she was a person, not just a valuable collection? I think that's exactly what we should do. The court hearing arrived faster than Claire had anticipated, barely a week after they discovered the sealed room. Patricia had prepared their case meticulously, with Harrison's appraisal report, photographs of the collection, Margaret Wilson's testimony about Judy Garland's connection to the items, and documentation of Evelyn's careful preservation efforts. The courtroom was smaller than Claire had expected, more bureaucratic and less dramatic than television had led her to believe. The Harpers sat at the plaintiff's table with their lawyer, Gerald Thorne, all of them dressed in expensive suits that screamed money and respectability. Claire wore the best outfit she owned, a dress from Goodwill that Maya had helped her choose, simple and clean, but obviously cheap. The contrast was deliberate on the Harpers' part, Claire realized. They wanted the judge to see the difference in their circumstances, to question why Evelyn would have left millions to someone who looked like she couldn't afford proper court attire. Judge Andrea Morrison entered, a black woman in her 50s with an expression that suggested she'd heard every argument and wasn't impressed by any of them. She reviewed the motions with the practiced efficiency of someone who managed a heavy caseload, then looked up at both parties. Mr. Thorne, your motion requests immediate access to the property for inspection and appraisal. What's your justification? Thorne stood, smoothing his expensive suit. Your Honor, our clients have reason to believe that valuable items on the property may be at risk of damage or theft. Ms. Donovan has no experience managing estates of this magnitude, and we have concerns about proper preservation and security. Ms. Westwood? Response? Patricia stood with calm confidence. Your Honor, Ms. Donovan has already taken extensive measures to secure the property. She's engaged Sotheby's auction house to provide professional conservation and security services. Dr. Harrison Webb, one of the foremost experts in Hollywood memorabilia, has personally overseen the protection of items on the property. I've submitted his report as exhibit. Judge Morrison flipped through the report, her expression neutral. This is quite the collection. Ruby slippers, journals, financial documents. Dr. Webb estimates the total value at $25 to $50 million. That's correct, Your Honor. These items were preserved by Evelyn Harper specifically for her heir. They've been professionally secured and documented. Thorne jumped in, which raises the question of whether Evelyn Harper was competent when she made that decision, Your Honor. What rational person leaves $50 million to a distant relative they've never met? Someone who was, at the time of the inheritance, homeless and unemployed? This suggests either diminished mental capacity or undue influence. Claire felt the blood drain from her face. The Harpers were going to use her homelessness against her, use her poverty as evidence that she didn't deserve the inheritance, that Evelyn couldn't have been sane to choose her. Judge Morrison looked directly at Claire for the first time. Ms. Donovan, did you ever meet Evelyn Harper? Claire stood, her legs shaky but her voice steady. No, Your Honor. I never met her. I didn't know she existed until Patricia called me about the inheritance. Did you ever communicate with her in any way? Letters, emails, phone calls? No, Your Honor. We had no contact. Then how do you explain her decision to leave you her entire estate? Claire took a breath, remembering Evelyn's letter, the photographs in the album, the careful preservation of the sealed room. I think she saw that my daughter and I stayed together despite circumstances that would have torn apart most families. I think she saw that we kept trying when it would have been easier to give up. And I think maybe she saw something in us that reminded her of Judy Garland. People who were strong despite circumstances that try to break them. The courtroom was silent. Judge Morrison studied Claire for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Ms. Westwood, you submitted psychiatric evaluations showing that Evelyn Harper was competent 6 months before her death. Yes, Your Honor. 2 independent psychiatrists examined her specifically to prevent challenges to her will. Both found her fully competent, clear-minded, and deliberate in her estate planning. And the private investigator reports? The ones tracking Ms. Donovan's life? Evelyn hired an investigator to follow Claire's life from a distance. She knew about Claire's struggles, her homelessness, her dedication to her daughter. She made an informed choice based on extensive information. That's not diminished capacity. That's careful decision-making. Thorne tried to regain ground. Your Honor, the very fact that she hired a private investigator to surveil a family member she never contacted suggests paranoia or obsessive behavior inconsistent with sound judgment. Patricia didn't miss a beat. Or it suggests someone who'd been hurt by family before and wanted to be certain of her heir's character before committing her life's work to them. Evelyn's engagement was broken tragically in the 1950s. She had difficult relationships with her own family. She chose to observe from a distance rather than risk personal connection. That may be sad, but it's not incompetent. Judge Morrison made notes, her pen scratching across the legal pad in front of her. Finally, she looked up. I'm denying the motion for immediate access. Dr. Webb's report demonstrates that the property is being professionally maintained and secured. The items in question are being properly conserved. The Harper family has not demonstrated any immediate risk that would justify overriding Ms. Donovan's property rights. Claire felt Maya's hand find hers under the table, squeezing hard. However, the judge continued, given the extraordinary value of the estate and the unusual circumstances of the inheritance, I'm ordering a full competency review of Evelyn Harper's mental state during the year prior to her death. I want testimony from her doctors, her attorneys, anyone who had regular contact with her. I want to understand whether her decision to leave this inheritance to Ms. Donovan was the product of a sound mind or impaired judgment. Your Honor, we already submitted psychiatric evaluations. Patricia started. I'm aware, but I want more comprehensive information. This case involves tens of millions of dollars being transferred to someone the testator never met. That's unusual enough to warrant additional scrutiny. We'll reconvene in 6 weeks for the competency hearing. In the meantime, Ms. Donovan retains possession and control of the property, and the Harper family is prohibited from entering without a court order. The gavel came down, and just like that, they'd won the battle but not the war. 6 more weeks of uncertainty. 6 more weeks of the Harpers gathering evidence and building their case. 6 more weeks of wondering whether Evelyn's gift would ultimately be taken away. Outside the courtroom, Victoria Harper Stanton approached Claire with a smile that didn't reach. Her eyes. You think you've won, but this is just beginning. We're going to prove Evelyn was senile, and when we do, that collection gets divided properly among family. Enjoy your mansion while you can. Claire met her gaze without flinching. Evelyn chose me. Not you. Not your father or your brother. Me. And she chose me because she watched my life and decided I deserve better. I'm going to honor that choice, and I'm going to win. We'll see. Victoria turned away, her heels clicking on the courthouse floor as she rejoined her family. Patricia put a hand on Claire's shoulder. That was well done. The judge is skeptical, but she's fair. If we can demonstrate that Evelyn was competent and deliberate, we'll prevail. And if we can't, then the estate gets divided among all of Linda's descendants, which in practice means the Harper family, since they're the only direct descendant. They'd argue for equal division among all family members, which would leave you with a fraction of the total value. Claire felt sick. After everything, after discovering the collection and securing it and beginning to imagine a future without poverty, it could all still be taken away. Not completely, she'd still get something, but the bulk of it would go to people who'd never struggled, who'd abandoned her mother and ignored Claire's existence until there was money involved. Maya tugged on her sleeve. Mom, we need to find people who knew Evelyn, people who can testify that she knew what she was doing. Your daughter's right, Patricia said. We need witnesses who can speak to Evelyn's mental state, her decision-making process, her reasons for choosing you. I'll subpoena her doctors and attorneys, but personal testimony carries weight. Did Evelyn have friends? People who visited her in assisted living? Claire had no idea. She'd never met Evelyn, had no knowledge of her social circle or relationships. But someone must have known her, must have understood what drove her decisions. Harrison knew her, Maya said. He said so when he came to the house. And maybe Margaret Wilson. She worked with Judy Garland, and Evelyn preserved Judy's things. They might have known each other. It was a start. Claire pulled out her phone and called Harrison, who answered on the second ring. Claire, how did the hearing go? We kept access to the property, but the judge ordered a competency review. Harrison, you said you knew Evelyn. How well? A pause. Not intimately, but we crossed paths at auctions and estate sales over the years. She had an encyclopedic knowledge of Hollywood history and a gift for identifying valuable items before anyone else realized their significance. Would you be willing to testify about her competency? About her careful decision-making? Absolutely. Evelyn was one of the sharpest people I knew. If the judge wants expert testimony about her mental acuity, I'm happy to provide it. Margaret Wilson was equally willing when Claire called her next. Evelyn contacted me about 3 years ago, asking questions about Judy's time in that house. She was preparing her will and wanted to make sure she had the timeline right. She was completely lucid, completely deliberate. I'll testify to that. Slowly, piece by piece, they began building their case. Patricia subpoenaed medical records and deposed Evelyn's doctors, all of whom confirmed she'd been sharp and engaged right up until her death. Her attorney testified about her careful estate planning, Her specific instructions about the inheritance, her explicit concern that the Harper family would contest the will. But the Harpers were building their case too. They found a nurse from the assisted living facility who claimed Evelyn had sometimes seemed confused about dates and names. They presented bills showing Evelyn had purchased the same magazine subscription 3 times, suggesting memory issues. They argued that her obsessive documentation of Claire's life showed paranoid tendencies inconsistent with sound judgment. The 6 weeks between hearings passed in a blur of stress and preparation. Claire and Maya settled into the mansion, making it genuinely livable while the conservation work continued in the sealed room. They fixed the leaking faucets themselves, patched the obvious roof leaks, began clearing the overgrown gardens with hand tools they borrowed from a neighbor who'd stopped by to introduce himself and was clearly curious about the new residents of the abandoned estate. The security system worked flawlessly, cameras capturing every squirrel and delivery person and curious passerby. Marcus Chun had done an excellent job, and Claire slept better knowing that the collection was protected. They were working in the garden on a Wednesday afternoon, pulling weeds and trimming back the worst of the overgrowth when a car pulled up the driveway. An older woman emerged, maybe 75, with salt and pepper hair and a cardigan despite the warm weather. "Excuse me," she called out. "I'm looking for Claire Donovan." Claire set down her pruning shears and approached, Maya following closely. "I'm Claire. My name is Dorothy Shields. I live about 2 miles from here. I heard through the neighborhood that Evelyn's property had finally been inherited. I wanted to introduce myself and, well, to tell you something about Evelyn that I think you should know." Claire invited her inside, made tea in the kitchen while Dorothy settled at the Formica table with the ease of someone who'd sat there before. "I visited Evelyn regularly for the last 5 years of her life," Dorothy said, wrapping her hands around the teacup. "We met at a library fundraiser, discovered we were neighbors, became friends. She talked about you, Claire, about watching your life from a distance, about wanting to help but being too afraid of rejection to reach out." Claire felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. "She talked about me?" "Constantly. She showed me the investigator reports, the photographs. She'd update me every few months about what was happening in your life. When you became homeless, she called me crying. She wanted to send you money, but her attorney advised against it, said it could complicate the inheritance, make it look like she was trying to establish a relationship for improper purposes. So she just watched us struggle." The bitterness in Claire's voice surprised even herself. She hated it, but she was terrified that if she reached out and you rejected her the way the rest of the Harper family had rejected your mother, it would kill her. So she did what she could, made sure her estate was in perfect order, paid the back taxes on this property, set up the trust fund that would support you after her death. She saw it as the greatest gift she could give you: security without strings, wealth without obligation, a chance to build a better life. Dorothy pulled an envelope from her purse. "She wrote you letters, Claire, dozens of them over the years. Never sent them, but she wrote them. Her attorney has the originals, but she gave me copies. She wanted me to make sure you got them if the family contested the will, so you'd know she wasn't senile or confused. She was lonely and scared and trying to make amends for abandoning you the way her family abandoned your mother." Claire opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside were photocopies of letters in Evelyn's handwriting, addressed to Dear Claire and dated spanning 5 years. The first one, from 2019, read, "You're 28 today. The investigator sent me a photo of you and Maya at a park, celebrating with cupcakes and secondhand toys. You looked exhausted but happy, and Maya looked at you like you hung the moon. I wish I could be there. I wish I could give Maya a proper birthday present, take you both to dinner, be the family you deserve. But I'm a coward, and so I watch from a distance and tell myself that leaving you my estate is enough." Claire read through letter after letter, watching Evelyn document her life through someone else's reports. Each letter was an apology, an explanation, a declaration of love from a woman too damaged by her own past to risk forming new connections. The final letter, dated 3 months before Evelyn's death, read, "I'm dying. The doctors confirmed it today. I have maybe 6 months, probably less. I should contact you, should introduce myself, should give you a chance to know me before I'm gone. But what if you hate me? What if you're angry that I watched for so long without helping? What if meeting me ruins the gift I'm trying to give you? So I remain silent, and I finish my preparations, and I hope that after I'm gone, you'll understand. I loved you from a distance. It wasn't enough, but it was all I was capable of. Please take care of the house. Please preserve Judy's things. Please give yourself and Maya the life I wish I'd been brave enough to help you build while I was alive. With all my love and regret, Evelyn. Claire was crying by the time she finished, tears falling onto the photocopied pages. Maya read over her shoulder, her own face wet with tears. Dorothy reached across the table and took Claire's hand. She wasn't senile. She wasn't confused. She was just sad and lonely and trying to do one good thing before she died. I'll testify to that. I'll tell the court about her clarity, her deliberation, her explicit reasoning for everything she did. Thank you. Claire could barely get the words out past the emotion clogging her throat. She'd be proud of you, you know. The way you've protected the collection, the way you're fighting for what she wanted to give you. She worried you might just sell everything and disappear, but I told her you wouldn't. I told her that anyone who kept their daughter safe and in school despite living in a car would honor the responsibility of this inheritance. I was right. After Dorothy left, promising to testify at the competency hearing, Claire and Maya sat together at the kitchen table, the letters spread out between them. She really did care, Maya said softly. She was just broken. Yeah, like Judy Garland. Like a lot of people who seem to have everything but are actually falling apart inside. Are we going to be okay, Mom? Or are we going to end up lonely too? Claire pulled her daughter close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. We're going to be different. We're going to use what Evelyn gave us to build connections, not isolate ourselves. We're going to honor her gift by living better than she did. The competency hearing arrived with all the weight of finality. This time, the courtroom was more crowded. Media had gotten wind of the story, and reporters filled the back rows, intrigued by the tale of a homeless mother inheriting tens of millions in Hollywood memorabilia from an aunt she'd never met. The Harpers presented their case first. The nurse from the assisted living facility testified about Evelyn's occasional confusion. A handwriting expert suggested that Evelyn's signature on the final will showed signs of tremor that could indicate neurological decline. A psychiatrist hired by the Harper family reviewed Evelyn's medical records and opined that her obsessive documentation of Claire's life suggested delusional thinking. Then it was Patricia's turn. Harrison took the stand first, describing Evelyn's sharp mind and careful eye for valuable items. I worked with her on several acquisitions over the years. She could quote market prices from decades past, could identify forgeries that fooled other experts, could predict what would appreciate in value before anyone else saw it. That's not the behavior of someone with diminished capacity. Margaret Wilson testified about Evelyn's careful questions regarding Judy Garland's timeline, her deliberate preservation of the dressing room, her explicit instructions about keeping the space sealed. She knew exactly what she had and what it was worth. She chose to give it to Claire because she believed Claire would respect its historical significance rather than just seeing dollar signs. Evelyn's doctors testified that while she'd had normal age-related changes, her cognitive function had remained intact. Her attorney described her meticulous estate planning, her anticipation of challenges, her specific instructions designed to protect her chosen heir. Finally, Dorothy Shields took the stand with the letters. Patricia had submitted them as evidence, and now Dorothy read selections aloud, Evelyn's voice coming through the words with painful clarity. These letters show a woman who was thoughtful, deliberate, and deeply concerned about making the right choice, Dorothy said. She documented her reasoning, questioned her own motives, sought advice from professionals. That's not diminished capacity. That's exactly what competent estate planning looks like. The Harper's attorney tried to discredit Dorothy, suggesting she'd been manipulated by Evelyn or had financial motivations. But Dorothy was unshakable, her testimony bolstered by the letters themselves, which showed Evelyn's clear thinking over years. The final witness was Claire herself. Patricia had prepared her extensively, But standing in front of Judge Morrison and answering questions about her life felt like being stripped naked in public. Ms. Donovan, the Harper's attorney began, his voice dripping with false sympathy. You were homeless when you inherited this estate, correct? Yes. Living in your car with your daughter? Yes. You've been evicted from multiple apartments for non-payment of rent? Yes. You lost 3 jobs in 2 years. The pandemic eliminated my positions. It wasn't a question of performance. But you were unemployed and destitute when Evelyn Harper's attorney contacted you. I was struggling financially, yes. And you expect this court to believe that a competent, rational person would leave tens of millions of dollars to someone in your position? Someone they'd never met? Someone who had no relationship with them whatsoever? Claire took a breath, remembering Patricia's coaching. Stay calm. Answer honestly. Let the facts speak. I think Evelyn saw that despite being in that position, I kept my daughter safe and in school. I think she saw that I hadn't given up, hadn't let the system separate us, hadn't stopped trying. And I think she saw something in that struggle that reminded her of Judy Garland, someone who was strong despite circumstances that try to break them. She didn't leave her estate to someone destitute. She left it to someone determined to survive. The attorney shifted tactics. You never try to contact Evelyn Harper? Never search for family that might help you? I didn't know she existed. My mother was estranged from the Harper family. They disowned her for getting pregnant with me. I assumed they wanted nothing to do with me. But surely when you're desperate, living in your car, you might have searched for family who could help. I did. I called my mother's siblings multiple times. They didn't return my calls. I reached out through social media. I was blocked. The Harper family made it very clear they didn't consider me family until there was an estate to contest. Judge Morrison intervened. Mr. Thorne, where are you going with this line of questioning? Your Honor, I'm establishing that Ms. Donovan had both motive and opportunity to manipulate a lonely, elderly woman. The fact that she never contacted Evelyn doesn't prove anything except that she was patient enough to wait for the payoff. Objection. Patricia was on her feet. There's no evidence of manipulation. Ms. Donovan never met Evelyn Harper. She didn't know about the inheritance until after Evelyn's death. This is pure speculation designed to smear my client's character. Sustained. Mr. Thorne, unless you have actual evidence of improper contact, move on. The questioning continued for another hour, the Harper's attorney trying every angle to suggest Claire was undeserving, opportunistic, manipulative. But without evidence of actual wrongdoing, it was all just innuendo and classist assumptions about poverty indicating moral failure. Finally, Judge Morrison called for closing arguments. Patricia stood, her voice clear and confident. Your Honor, this case isn't really about Evelyn Harper's competency. The evidence overwhelmingly shows she was mentally sharp right up until her death. This case is about whether the Harper family can accept that Evelyn chose someone they don't approve of, someone whose poverty they see as evidence of unworthiness rather than what it actually was, bad luck and circumstances beyond her control. Evelyn Harper watched Claire Donovan's life for years. She saw a young single mother keep her daughter safe and educated despite homelessness. She saw resilience and determination and love. And she decided that person deserved better. She decided to use her wealth to give Claire and Maya a chance at the stability they'd earned but never been given. That's not incompetence. That's not diminished capacity. That's a rational choice made by a woman who understood exactly what she was doing and who she was doing it for. We ask that you uphold Evelyn's wishes and deny the Harper family challenge. Thorne's closing was predictably different, arguing that Evelyn's isolation had made her vulnerable to delusion, that her obsessive documentation of Claire's life showed paranoid thinking, that no rational person would make such an extraordinary bequest to a stranger. Judge Morrison took notes throughout, her expression neutral. When both sides had finished, she closed her notebook and looked up. I'll take this under advisement. I need time to review all the evidence and testimony. I'll issue a written ruling within 2 weeks. Until then, the current arrangements remain in effect. Court is adjourned. The waiting began again. 2 weeks of uncertainty while Judge Morrison decided whether Evelyn had been competent, whether Claire deserved the inheritance, whether the Harpers would succeed in taking what Evelyn had explicitly chosen to give away. Claire and Maya returned to the mansion and threw themselves into work. They continued clearing the gardens, revealing beautiful landscaping that had been buried under years of neglect. They repaired broken windows and fixed minor plumbing issues. They slowly transformed the house from an abandoned wreck into something that was beginning to feel like a home. The conservation team finished their work on the sealed room, installing climate control and proper lighting and archival storage. The collection was now preserved in conditions that would protect it for decades or centuries. Harrison promised that whenever they were ready to sell, whenever the legal issues were resolved, Sotheby's would conduct the most significant Hollywood memorabilia auction in history. But Claire found herself increasingly reluctant to think about selling. These items had belonged to Judy Garland, had been preserved by Evelyn, had been given to her and Maya for reasons that went beyond monetary value. Selling felt like betraying that trust, like reducing something meaningful to just a transaction. What if we don't sell everything? She asked Maya one evening as they sat in the tower room watching the sun set over Los Angeles. What if we keep some items and donate others to museums? What if we use the money from what we do sell to create something that helps people? Like what? Like a foundation for homeless families, or a scholarship program for kids who've been in unstable housing. Something that honors what Evelyn gave us by helping other people who are where we were. Maya nodded slowly. I think Evelyn would like that, and I think Judy Garland would too, using her things to help people instead of just making rich collectors richer. They made plans tentatively, knowing everything depended on the judge's ruling. But planning gave them something to focus on besides anxiety, something hopeful to imagine beyond just winning or losing the legal battle. The ruling came on a Thursday morning, delivered via email from Patricia. Judge Morrison has ruled in our favor. Evelyn Harper has been found competent. The will stands. The estate is yours. Claire read the email 3 times before the words fully penetrated. They'd won. After everything, after the Harpers' challenges and the legal warfare and the months of uncertainty, Evelyn's choice had been upheld. Maya found her mother sitting on the floor of the master bedroom, crying with relief and exhaustion and grief for a woman she'd never met, but who'd changed her life anyway. We won? Maya asked, though she'd clearly read the email over Claire's shoulder. We won. They held each other in the morning sunlight, streaming through windows that overlooked gardens they were slowly reclaiming from wilderness. The mansion was theirs. The collection was theirs. The future Evelyn had tried to give them was finally, legally, irrevocably theirs. Patricia called an hour later with details. The Harpers can still appeal, but it's unlikely to succeed. Judge Morrison's ruling was thorough and well-reasoned. She found that Evelyn was competent, deliberate, and had legitimate reasons for choosing you over other potential heirs. Congratulations, Claire. You did it. The Harpers didn't appeal. 2 days later, Victoria called directly, her voice tight with barely controlled rage. You won't enjoy this. Money doesn't buy happiness. You'll end up miserable and alone, just like Evelyn did. Claire hung up without responding. The Harpers were wrong about so many things, but perhaps most importantly about this. Claire and Maya wouldn't end up like Evelyn because they had each other, because they understood what mattered, because they'd learned through hardship what wealth alone could never teach. The mansion was theirs. The collection was theirs. But more importantly, they had survived together, had proven they deserved this impossible gift, had honored Evelyn's faith in them by fighting for what she'd wanted to give. And now, finally, they could begin building the future Evelyn had hoped for when she'd watched them from a distance and decided they were worth saving. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.